When he came here to Washington last week, Benjamin Netanyahu was happy to hear the plan for Gaza that Donald Trump set out. And since then, the Israelis have appeared to be following Donald Trump's messaging on the conflict.
Tonight, the Prime Minister echoed the same threat Donald Trump had issued on Monday from the Oval Office. Unless all hostages are released by lunchtime Saturday, then the ceasefire will be over and the war will resume.
In light of Hamas' announcement of its decision to violate the agreement and not release our hostages, last night I ordered the military to gather forces inside and around the Gaza Strip. This operation is being carried out at this time. It will be completed in the very near future. The decision that I passed unanimously in the cabinet is this: if Hamas does not return our hostages by Saturday noon, the ceasefire will end, and the military will return to intense fighting until Hamas is finally defeated.
We'll get to Joel and Jake in a second to discuss the politics around all this, but first let's get a state of play from Mikey Kay on what the Israelis might be thinking of, because we've seen the enormous destruction, Mikey, that there is in Gaza. Donald Trump's talked about it. If you were in the targeting cell in the IDF right now, what's the plan?
Well, I mean, first thing I've got to say is I have been in a targeting cell before, and the rules that the IDF are running by are quite different to the rules that we would run by in terms of rules of engagement and collateral damage estimate. But effectively, inside that targeting cell, you'll have intelligence coming in, three types of intelligence, mainly human intelligence from informants, imagery intelligence from predators looking down, and then electronic intelligence, so tapping into phone calls and listening into what effectively Hamas are doing. All that intelligence will be coming into the targeting cell, and then from that they'll get a number of targets in terms of locations, where they'll be, and then they'll put a priority order on what those targets are. They've got capabilities of dropping precision guided munitions. When we used to do this, it was a huge process of CDE, collateral damage estimate. Collateral damage estimate basically is using pattern of life and all the intelligence to work out how you minimize collateral. The UK, for example, has a very, very, very high tolerance to collateral. So, it won't drop a bomb if it thinks civilians are going to get killed. Now, what we've got here is we've got 70% of Gaza already destroyed. You've got Hamas depleted to quite minimal levels. And then you have refugees, internally displaced people, now flooding back into the areas that have been destroyed in their tens, if not hundreds of thousands. So you have this predicament where if the IDF restart this, they're going to start targeting Hamas, could be the tunnels, hundreds of kilometers of tunnels underneath Gaza, but a lot of them are already taken out through the dropping of apartment blocks, etc. So you've got that conundrum, and then you've got all these civilians coming back in who are trying to look for their homes, rebuild their homes. And so the usual protocol is that the IDF will say, there's a target in this area, leave.
In the months that have gone by, the IDF have leafleted areas that they are going to target, or they've sent out messages on cell phones. Presumably they would do that again, but why does the messaging that they're getting from the White House now affect what goes on the battlefield? Well,
that's the number one game changer between now and before the ceasefire was called. Before the ceasefire was called, Donald Trump wasn't calling for the US to basically go in and rebuild it into Trump Tower. But now they are. So if you're a Gazan going back to where your home was, irrespective of whether it's rubble or it's partially standing or still standing, and then you get leaflets saying, you got to leave because we're targeting this area. So, I mean, of course they're not going to leave, because if they leave, they know they're never going to go back again. And so there's this whole new conundrum now of minimum Hamas targets, maximum civilians. And so the potential here for collateral damage and more civilians being killed is, I would say, even greater than it was.
Mikey, thanks for that. Joel, that's a really interesting military dynamic to what is going on in the region. But of course, now we've got the politics as well overlaid. There's a lot of brinkmanship going on here between Hamas and the Israeli government. But as Mikey says, the messaging that's coming from the White House is not unconnected to what might now unfold on the battlefield.
Absolutely not, Christian. And I think we still are hearing the shockwaves of the stunning announcement from a week ago where President Trump essentially told the world that he wanted the United States to control Gaza and to displace 2 million Palestinians immediately and without authorization, without money, without a plan. I can go on and on about the dynamics of that. But what it's done is it's effectively thrown a wrench in the ongoing ceasefire. Now, that was what the president was supposed to be discussing with the prime minister last week, and how to keep the ceasefire going, this stage 2 period that we're currently in that has a few more weeks left. And then, of course, to begin the phase 3, the end state, and have a negotiation on that. He just kind of blew it up. And now we're seeing the results, which is there is nobody overseeing the ceasefire negotiations that has credibility right now, and it's collapsing before our eyes.
Joel, I actually want to take a closer look at that because we saw this interesting interplay today between the King of Jordan, King Abdullah, who was at the White House, and Donald Trump. And we know that the King of Jordan has said, he and Egypt reject Donald Trump's plans to buy or own Gaza and to resettle Palestinians there. And at the same time, Jordan today saying that they will take in 2,000 sick Palestinian children. That doesn't appear to have shifted Donald Trump's message, though, on Gaza. Take a listen.
We're not going to buy anything. We're going to have it, and we're going to keep it, and we're going to make sure that there's going to be peace, and there's not going to be any problem, and nobody's going to question it. And we're going to run it very properly, and eventually we'll have economic development at a very large scale, maybe the largest scale on that site. And we'll have lots of good things built there, including hotels and office buildings and housing and other things. And we'll make that site into what it should be.
Jake, no buy-in from the region, from Egypt to Jordan, of course. What do you make of Donald Trump doubling down on these comments?
Well, there's a short-term issue here in terms of the ceasefire and the return of hostages. We need to mention this, the return of hostages and the terrible conditions that we have seen so far that folks have been enduring. President Trump initiated the call for Saturday at noon. You saw Prime Minister Netanyahu back that statement up. It's critically important. In terms of what's going to take place there, you saw Secretary of State Marco Rubio say, if you have a better idea, now is the time for that. Arab leaders are going to meet in Egypt later this month. And if there's a better idea out there, then it needs to come forward. I think what you see here is President Trump offering a new idea, a new solution to a many decades old problem that no one else has been able to solve. And so I think that this puts Arab leaders throughout the Middle East in a position to step up. They're forced to come up with ideas. They're forced to take some responsibility in this circumstance.
Wait, hold on, Jake. Just can I jump in there, Jake? This idea that Donald Trump is presenting flies in the face of international law.
Well, listen, there is, without question, a lot of anxiety about what he has said throughout the international community, even within the United States. A lot of surprise at the announcement that he made. But I think the effect of what he is saying is going to cause nations in the Middle East to take a step up, which is necessary to solve this problem in the end. I think you see the president in his first administration with the Abraham Accords make tremendous progress for peace in the Middle East. I think that is his intention now, to continue that peace process. And as I said before, Secretary of State Marco Rubio has an open ear to new ideas about how to solve this problem and how to take responsibility, because ultimately we have to stop the killing and we need to make sure that Hamas is not in a position to attack Israel ever again.
Joel?
Well, look, I mean, Christian Sumi, the Congressman, with all due respect, this is not a plan or an idea. There is no process being described. I concur. The hostages need to come out, and there is an actual ceasefire process underway right now that the president allegedly supports. But what he's doing right now is destroying American credibility in the region. He's undermining our word. He's making our allies, with whom we have deep partnerships on security issues, intelligence cooperation, economic trade. He's making them incredibly nervous about what is going on inside the White House. And if I were them, I'd be looking over my shoulder right now in terms of the aid. Will the aid packages continue to Egypt and Jordan? And if that's the case, and if it's called into question, will they now look to our adversaries, China in particular, as a more stable ally, because this White House is not projecting stability. It's destabilizing the politics of the region.
Jake, this statement we've had from Prime Minister Netanyahu is almost word for word what we heard from the president in the Oval Office last night. Do you think that makes the hostages safer? Do you think it opens up the possibility, really, that all the hostages are coming out? Because I look at it and I think the hostages are the only leverage that Hamas has left.
I think that it is more likely that the hostages, all of the hostages, will be released. And no question, this is making countries in the region that we have military relationships with, like Jordan, it's giving them some anxiety and some pause. I think the president's position on this, and I think the way most Americans that share his party view this, is that he is trying to motivate people to step up to the table and propose solutions, to take some responsibility for what the future looks like. Because what we've seen over the past, with respect, in this last administration was not a stable or safe world. It was a world where American leadership was questioned, it was unreliable, and you saw, whether it was in Ukraine or in Israel, a lot of strife break open over the last 4 years. And so I think we should be, I think we should have some level of pause at judgment for what President Trump is doing, and let's see what happens. As I mentioned, Arab leaders are going to come together. Let's see what solutions come out of this.
Yeah, they did indeed say that in due time they will present a considered proposal that would be perhaps a counter to what Donald Trump is proposing. But we'll be watching that closely, of course, as the ceasefire agreement hangs in the balance. More to talk about coming up, of course. Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News.